Hello and welcome everyone to day 2 of the Indeed Policy Forum on advancing evidence-based policy, practice, and evaluation in the preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization fields. And of course, in this policy forum, we're focusing on the role of policy and policymakers in these areas. My name is Kai Brand Jacobson. I'm the president of the Romanian Peace Institute, Patrir, and part of the larger team of the Indeed project, bringing together researchers, practitioners, colleagues working in both governmental and non-governmental organizations in a major European Commission project focusing on advancing evidence-based evaluation in the field. Today, we have two parts of the policy forum, day 2. We're beginning with a special session dedicated to the topic of communities of practice, and we'll look a little bit more into that at the moment. We have some wonderful speakers that are joining us today. And then we'll have the opportunity towards the end of today's event to share with you about the upcoming final Indeed event and second international Policy and Practitioners Forum, which will be taking place this September 11th to 13th in Warsaw, Poland. In that session, we'll be presenting what the forum will be addressing in the Indeed final event, as well as opportunities for institutions, agencies, organizations, and governments and practitioners, policymakers, and researchers to take part in that forum. That will come a little bit later on in today's session. But to start us off today, we're just going to begin with a brief sharing about Indeed as an organization itself and some of the deliverables, tools, and results which can be useful for you as practitioners, policymakers, and colleagues in the field. For those of you joining for the first time, Indeed is a project which is made up of 19 partners, bringing together, as I said, both government ministries, police and local law enforcement agencies, researchers, academics, and practitioners working from different sectors in the preventing and countering of violent extremism and de-radicalization. The focus of the Indeed project has really been to look at supporting, strengthening an evidence-based approach to designing and evaluating PCVE initiatives. Within that, we focus on developing evidence-based evaluation within the field and also looking at how do we do evidence-based policymaking and practice. There are a number of tools which have been developed by the project, which we hope will be useful to you and to the field more broadly. One of them is the repository of studies on risk and protective factors. This itself is a step forward in the field, bringing together more than 250 studies, including vetted academic research and publications and results of previous evaluations. The database is searchable by a number of different areas, so you can look into population groups, ideological strains, various types of risk or protective factors, and the database will help to harvest the information from all of these studies that can be useful to you. This was a piece of work which was pioneered by our colleague Stefan Kloss, together with cooperation and contributions from many partners within the Indeed project. In addition to the repository of studies on risk and protective factors, we're also working currently on bringing together a repository of evidence-based initiatives, looking at what can we learn from existing practice in the field. We also have had colleagues, especially Lena Malki and Irina from the University of Helsinki, who have been working together with all of the consortium on developing the Indeed tool. This is a free tool available in 10 languages online, which can help to guide you in developing evaluations for national and local strategies and policies, long-term and short-term projects, and ad hoc initiatives, as well as case-based learning. The Indeed tool takes you step by step. It's an online tool that guides you in how do you develop your evaluation, selecting your evaluation team, looking at your objectives, looking at the data and information you have, and very innovatively for the field, it goes thoroughly into looking at the gender ethical, legal, and societal aspects of evaluation. The latest edition of the tool, after the prototyping and beta testing of the first, has now been updated and released on the Indeed website, and you can find it there. Together with the Indeed e-guidebooks, there's one guidebook on evidence-based evaluation of PCVE and de-radicalization initiatives. Again, Irina van der Vet, Lena Malki, and Mina Prokic, the lead authors here. And the second guidebook, written by the same authors, on how to design PVE, CVE, and de-radicalization initiatives and evaluations according to the principles of evidence-based practice. We also have a range of tools to support training and capacity building in the field. We carried out a baseline where we saw that today in most countries, there is little or no training that is done on how to actually do either evaluation in the PCV and de-radicalization fields. There's no training on what is evaluation, how to do it, the different approaches and methods in most countries within Europe, but also internationally. And there is a lack of training on how to design policies and initiatives in the field with practice. Within the Indeed project, we have created a range of curricula, which will be translated in the coming months into 10 different languages. And the idea is to make these available freely for use by staff colleges, training academies, universities, non-governmental organizations, and others. The material within these training curricula is designed to be modular, so you can either take and deliver the programs as a whole as standalone 2-day programs, or you can integrate as, for example, the police in Portugal did just this last May, taking select modules on evidence-based evaluation and the Indeed evidence-based evaluation tool and introducing it into their already existing trainings to use the materials to help improve awareness and understanding of evidence-based evaluation within their contexts. We'll also have 2 training manuals which can support trainers in the provision of these materials, and are designing and making available online self-paced courses, which can be taken up by ministries, agencies, and organizations in the field, as well as used by individual practitioners and policymakers who would like to deepen their knowledge on designing, implementing, and utilizing effective evaluation in the field, or on designing evidence-based PVE, CVE, and de-radicalization initiatives. Finally, and this is the last part of the introduction, just to share with you, we also are producing the Indeed Knowledge Series. And in the Knowledge Series, we've been carrying out a series of webinars throughout the last year, and we'll shortly be launching the Indeed podcast, including interviews with leading experts, researchers, practitioners, evaluators in the field, sharing with us from their pioneering work, their case studies, challenges they face, as well as innovative practices. These podcasts are also available as video interviews, and we're producing short learning notes to extract key ideas and learning from them. Now, that's the last bit of what we'd like to share in this introductory part on the Indeed project and tools, but you can discover more by going to the Indeed website and also signing up, if you haven't already, for the Indeed newsletter, where we provide regular information and updates on the work in the project. But before we go to today's session, for those who weren't able to join us on day 1 of the Policy Forum, I'd like to take a moment and share with you from an excellent presentation, which was given by Tarja Mankinen of the Prevention of Radicalization Unit from DG Home of the European Commission. Tarja helped to share with us yesterday about the creation of the new EU Knowledge Hub, which was launched just this, I believe, June 17th. The Knowledge Hub represents really a new phase in the field of sharing experiences, learning, and working to connect practitioners, policymakers, and researchers across the European space who are working in the fields of preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization. Here you can see some of the different actors that will be involved in this Knowledge Hub space. Some of the activities and services which will be offered by the EU Knowledge Hub on the prevention of radicalization will include thematic panels bringing together platforms of experts and networks to discuss brainstorm, and consolidate knowledge within key areas of the field. It will also be supporting project-based collaboration on member state-led initiatives addressing predefined topics to help to improve exchanges and collaboration among stakeholders involved. There will be policy and practice joint events, really learning from what has been brought forward by practitioners, researchers, and many others in the field over the last years on the need to strengthen that connection between practitioners working directly on the ground and in the breadth of agencies working in the field with policymakers that are helping to shape the policies and strategies at national, local, and European levels to support and guide work in the field. They also plan to have a series of ad hoc workshops and events, study visits, and a range of tailor-made support services, including an on-call desk to be able to provide assistance responding to specific needs of member states. And they'll focus on training, mentoring, and job shadowing, research, and improving the use of foresight scenarios to anticipate future developments in the violent extremism and radicalization fields. The last bit just to share with you is we think it's important and really brings together some of the overall principles and objectives which so many working in preventing and countering violent extremism, de-radicalization, and counterterrorism have been emphasizing throughout many years now. The guiding principles and objectives for the new EU Knowledge Hub are to take a whole of society approach, to integrate local and national strategies and bringing together governmental, non-governmental, civil society experts, to take a holistic approach with greater focus on prevention, tackling root causes and fostering social exclusion instead of the overemphasis on reactive strategies and approaches. They recognize and will embed their work in the need to strengthen multi-sectoral collaboration, bringing together the breadth of stakeholders involved in the field, and also giving greater emphasis to bottom-up approaches, really empowering and supporting local actors, local communities, and civil society organizations in addressing those specific issues and challenges in their rooted contexts in their communities. In addition to a breadth of in-person activities, they're also very much looking at the field and the space of online and digital radicalization and engaging deeply with research and foresight. Many of the colleagues and partner organizations in Indeed are also part of the new consortium in the EU Knowledge Hub and will build upon the work of the Indeed project to bring forward evidence-based approaches and future scenario planning. In addition to all of the activities that the Knowledge Hub will foster within Europe, it will also look at international cooperation and collaborating with priority third countries. If you'd like to receive more information, you can also sign up and go to the EU Knowledge Hub where they provide updates and information on their work. But we have some wonderful speakers and colleagues with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to take us to our first session on day 2 of the Indeed Policy Forum. Our session, which you're joining us for today, focuses on creating communities of practice for evidence-based evaluation in the PCVE and de-radicalization fields. We're joined today by Josephine Mwenda, Sophie Ebeke, and myself. Unfortunately, Eileen van Leuven, who is one of the creators of this session and has been a very passionate champion of communities of practice in the field, is not able, due to location and connection, to be joining us at the moment. But I just wanted to acknowledge and really deeply appreciate both the personal contribution of Eileen and the exceptional work being done by the newly launched Monitoring and Evaluation Center of Excellence of the International Center for Counterterrorism. Before we dive into today's event, I'd like to just introduce our speakers. We're joined by Ms. Josephine Mwenda, who serves as the Evaluation and Compliance Officer in the Evaluation and Compliance Unit of the Office of the Under-Secretary General of UNOCT, with over 5 years of experience in evaluating counterterrorism and PCV initiatives. Ms. Mwenda has combined experience of over 12 years in designing frameworks for monitoring and evaluation of global and national public sector programs. In her current function and as the evaluation subject matter expert at UNOCT, Ms. Mwenda provides methodological guidance and advice on evaluations. Since joining UNOCT in 2018, Ms. Mwenda has been instrumental in setting up a functioning evaluation infrastructure supported by an evaluation policy, evaluation handbook and guidelines, and including related tools and systems. Under Ms. Mwenda's purview, UNOCT has conducted 6 evaluations comprising strategic, programmatic, and meta-synthesis evaluations. Ms. Mwenda holds an MA in International Development Policy obtained from Duke University and an MA in Policy and Public Administration from the University of Botswana. We have had the pleasure and the privilege of having Josephine Mwenda with us in past Indeed events as well, and it is always a wonderful opportunity to hear from her. And Josephine, thank you so much. We're very glad to have you with us today. I'd also like to introduce Sophie Ebeke. Sophie is a research associate at the Global Public Policy Institute. Her research examines challenges and needs for evidence-based PCV practices and effective evaluation, including the role of evaluation support tools for capacity building efforts. Previously, she worked as a researcher and junior lecturer on radicalization within the armed forces and transnational security threats. And Sophie Ebeke is also one of the team that is involved in the pioneering and innovative Preval initiative in Germany, which we will learn a bit more about today as well. And we had the opportunity to carry out a video interview and podcast with Sophie on their experiences earlier in the Indeed project, and we'll launch that in the coming weeks to make that available as well. Josephine, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us today. Very much looking forward to your presentations. And with that, I'm going to hand over the screen and the microphone, Josephine, to you. I'm going to stop sharing, so you should be able to now share your presentation. And just once again, on behalf of myself and all of the consortium and partners in the Indeed project, to say thank you for joining us today and to welcome all of the participants in today's session.
Thank you very much, Kai, and we are very happy to be here, and also for inviting us, to this forum. Greetings to everyone joining. I'm joining from New York. As Kai has dutifully introduced me, I will not go into details of explaining who I am. Just to thank you that you're inviting us for the second time, and we're very grateful. We enjoyed the participation in the previous Indeed forum that we had in November last year. And we are happy to share our experiences today on this topic. So with me today, I have been joined by a colleague of mine, Darine. I'm sure she's somewhere in the cyber here. But I'm also want to recognize, I think, the presence of the chair of our Resource Mobilization Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group, Ms. Jorena, and also the chair of the subgroup on evaluation, to which I'm also the co-chair that is under the Resource Mobilization Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group. So in terms of what we are going to do today, I'll begin with a discussion on the context of the subgroup on evaluation. And here we will be followed by the introduction of the subgroup, how we got started, and then we'll be able to share some of the evaluation products that we have achieved. We've also had challenges and opportunities. We'll also share that, and also the overall reflections and the key takeaways. So in terms of the introduction, we know that evaluation plays a very important role in assessing the extent to which the UN entities, its technical assistance is relevant and impactful in supporting the member states. And so back in 2016, the Secretary General, when he was not yet the Secretary General, delivered a mission statement where he emphasized the need and importance for evaluation. And that statement has continued to shape how the entire UN views the evaluation function. So the need to assess and measure results of the UN activities towards the implementation of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy has been expressed at the highest level. I've already stated the mission statement of the USG, but also this has also been seen in the meta-synthesis that was done the other General Assembly resolutions and mandates, and all to say that there's been increasing focus on the evaluation and assessing the impact of the UN's work on the CT and PCDE. And in terms of the global counterterrorism strategy, this is the compact, the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Coordination Compact was established in 2018, and with the aim to strengthen a common UN approach to support member states in their requests in the implementation of the strategy. So the compact is the largest coordination framework within the UN, and it promotes an all of UN approach to combating terrorism and preventing violent extremism. So it currently has 47 entities and 40 compact entities, compact members, and 7 observers, and it collaborates within 8 working groups. And one of the working groups is the Resource Mobilization, Monitoring, and Evaluation Working Group, to which I belong, and to which UNOCT is the chair through Jerena. Here, I'm just trying to situate where the subgroup is located in the RMME working group. So the subgroup also functions as a community of practice for M&E in CT and PCD in a broader sense, in that it facilitates learning, collaboration, knowledge sharing, and entities' interest in these different fields. As already mentioned, it's chaired by UNODC. I am the co-chair to this working group, and we do a lot of work in terms of advancing the work of evaluations in the M&E for CT and PCD space. Focus. Our main objective is to contribute to the decision making at all levels. So we share a lot of evaluation knowledge and best practices, and we come up with some tools and methods to support the entire architecture of the compact. And we also coordinate evaluation practices by doing joint work, and we also provide expert advice, to the entire compact architecture. So now here, I just want to emphasize that, the rest of our presentation today is going to be framed around a range of concrete results that has been produced by the subsequent evaluation. And also, we believe that sustainability of COPs like ourselves, it should be premised on its agility. It's able to adapt to different situations, and also in the changing environments, it has to be flexible and also be able to engage to provide solutions to emerging issues that we experience in the CT and PCDE fields. So how did we get started? In get started, for the subgroup, so there was a group of dedicated, individuals from different entities. And from this strong collaboration, we actually sought for opportunities of what we could do that would be visible enough, and give, the visibility for the work that we do in the CT and PCDE. So the first thing that we did was to undertake a meta-synthesis of evaluations of global counterterrorism strategy entities. And the idea was to aggregate the results at a higher level to make sure that it's arranged in such a way that it's able to inform decisions. And in this process, we analyzed 118 evaluation reports and oversight reports. And here, we were able to also augment that with some interviews and analysis. Suffice to say that the product that came out of this process has informed a lot of work that we do as the subgroup. For instance, the recommendations from the meta-synthesis have actually led to a lot of work that we are involved in as a subgroup. We have developed a compendium of good practices in evaluating CT and PCDE efforts, and we'll be talking about that more later. We have also created a community of practice on CT and PCDE. And through this subgroup, we've also been ensuring that we integrate the monitoring and evaluation aspects into projects that have been provided in the joint appeal. We also undertake joint evaluations to support each entity, with technical expertise. So the shared products that we have achieved as follows. The compendium, I've already talked about this. So the compendium was actually a result of the meta-synthesis recommendation to provide capacity to internal and external stakeholders. So this product was foundational in the sense that it's been able to bring a lot of players and the different entities that include member states and other UN entities, even beyond the UN itself. We talk about HEDAIA and GCEP that have cooperated, in bringing about this product. And this is a product that was launched sometime in June last year, and it's there for everyone to be able to engage with. The other work that we have done, as I've already mentioned, is to support the joint appeal for Africa. So this is an initiative that is also undertaken by another subgroup under the RMME working group that supports 10 multi-year partner flagship program and initiatives. It brings together 16 UN global entities, and also its priority is on focusing on prevention and human resource. So our intervention here was to ensure that these projects were fully equipped, with aspects of evaluations, that they had in their mechanisms to ensure that they're able to be evaluated. And so the subgroup on evaluation reviewed all the 10 proposals of this joint appeal, and we ensured that all the proposals had evaluations adequately included in them. And also we requested that there should be a selection criteria that should ensure that there is strong M&E component in all these proposals. So the other work that we have done is joint evaluations. As a subgroup, we supported the midterm independent evaluation of the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Travel Program. And this one was done in cooperation with UNODC, but there are a lot of other implementing entities that are implementing this program. I think what we need to note here is that, we bring together different expertise when we're doing these joint evaluations to ensure that we're able to benefit from different expertise and not just the evaluators. And so far, we have done this joint independent evaluation, and we have 2 more that we will be, we are actually managing at this particular moment. So we also have a collaborative platform that has been created on the UNOCT Connect and Learn for the community of practice. And currently there are about 16 members comprising of civil society members, the EU and the UN. And the progress in this venture is at the stage where we're now drafting principles of working together, including the terms of reference. And we are also developing the content for the platform. So the subgroup is also crucial in also undertaking the mandates that has come from the General Assembly, which has requested that in future reporting, there has to be an assessment of how entities that contribute to the strategy, to the implementation of the global counterterrorism strategy, are implementing all the activities. And this mandate requires that there has to be an impact assessment, which should be based on a unified results framework. And so, of course, we realize that there's no unified results framework to support this impact assessment. So as a subgroup of the resource mobilization, monitoring and evaluation, we have proposed a two-stage process, and that approach is couched in a project where the first product that should come out of it in the first phase will be a unified results framework. And then thereafter, we should be able to conduct an impact assessment based on this results framework. And this multi-year project, as already mentioned, being implemented by the Army Working Group, through the subgroup will be in earnest beginning in July next month, and also will be extending until the 2025. We are in the process of raising funds for especially this first phase, and also the implementation of the impact assessment that will come later on. So let me just turn to the challenges and opportunities that we've been able to experience in our journey. So our opportunities lie from the fact that evaluation is placed at a higher level in the UN agenda. We have the support of the Secretary General himself, who has stated in his various fora how important it is to be accountable for our results. The other opportunity was that evaluations and the measuring results has been embedded in the compact work. That's why we have the monitoring and evaluation, the resource mobilization monitoring and resource mobilization working group, specifically looking at this component for the entire Global Compact. Then we have the support from our senior leadership and all the members of the RME working group. Then I think for the subgroup, one of the major stepping stones was that there was presence of seed funding, which we were able to use to undertake the meta-synthesis. In this case, and as we have already seen, the meta-synthesis sort of brought out the program of work for the entire subgroup. So this was very foundational for the work of the subgroup, and we've been able to build on by implementing different recommendations from the meta-synthesis. And then, of course, one of the other opportunities is the dedication of various individuals that we've had. And most importantly, I think the championships that we have from most UN entities. Like for our RME working group, we have the chair who's a big champion for M&E activities and who supports the whole work that we do in terms of doing fundraising for other activities, and also helping with getting the recognition and the visibility of the work that we do and the products that we produce. So in terms of the challenges, we found that the COPs and also evaluations are resource-intensive ventures, and they require dedicated resources and capacity. And definitely we've seen this in our work, where we see that we need dedicated capacity, especially for the day-to-day operations of our platform on Connect and Learn. So the other challenge has been that evaluation, being a technical field, requires that messages are tailored to the various players or various stakeholders that we are working with at any particular moment, simply because they may not be able to understand the jargon from the evaluation field. And also the fact that, the linkage between CT and evaluation is not very evident. So we find sometimes resistance from, practitioners in CT, and therefore we have to engage in dialogue to make them understand, the needs of evaluations and the evidence that it should be able to provide for them to be able to understand what is working and what is not working. There's also a need for the COPs to remain relevant, to its members. So we need to innovate at all times, and we realize that having, targeted outputs that brings together, different sets of players is something that helps to make these COPs relevant at any time. Of course, building in the agility of it to make sure that there are other people that can be co-opted in this space, and for them to contribute with their expertise. And also other challenges that we need clear rules of engagement. So for us, as we are developing the TORs and principles of working together, we realize that people need to understand what the COP stands for, what its objectives are, and also how it's supposed to be engaging with others, because there's also the fear that people can usurp, the COP in a certain direction if these principles are not clearly laid out. So our overall reflections, and this is, I think, and takeaways, this is where I'm going to end with the presentation, is that, cooperation is a force multiplier. We can go far if we're able to, engage with a lot of different players. For instance, for us, We found that it was essential to promote shared learning and leverage existing capacities, including utilizing existing frameworks for joint evaluations. We also have to identify, opportunities where we can cooperate as different entities, and also building on existing technical expertise resources. Some entities may have the capacity in terms of expertise, others may have the capacity in terms of financial. So we have to look at these spaces to see how we can cooperate. And then we have to have tangible outputs or outcomes that we can collaborate with. I've already mentioned this point. Agility is also another aspect that we see as being important. Once we realize what tangible outcome or output we want to achieve, then it's easier to invite, like-minded people to ensure that we deliver on those deliverables. Also, we need to, I think, be mindful of the combination of the evaluation and thematic expertise. There's a tendency also from us evaluators to try to go it our way, but we should also open the space for other expertise, human rights, gender. These are important aspects that come into play in as we do this work in CITI and PCBE. So this space should be open to a lot of other players and expertise. We have to also identify opportunities for visibility. We can only be relevant if we are able to solve problems through evaluative evidence where there are problems that can be solved in such a manner. And so this also brings visibility, and it also ensures that we are also relevant in this space. We also need to ensure that with realistic approaches, and we're already capitalizing on something that is already existing. I think I've spoken a lot, and I've been speaking quite quickly because there was a lot to cover, but thank you so much. I have come to the end of the presentation. And here I've just provided, a list of the people that we work with and the champions that we have in the evaluation field that's supporting the work of the subgroup. And we can get in touch with them whenever we need. And I'm ready to respond to any questions if there's any. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Josephine, for a wonderful and so rich and thorough presentation and helping to take us through the experience and the very critical work that is being done. Thank you very much for that. Now, before we go, or actually, in order to go further, I would like to now give the floor to Sophie Ebeke. Josephine, if you can stop the sharing on your presentation, we will have the space for discussion and come back together afterwards. If you do have questions for Josephine, please also make use of the chat space. You can click on the chat button, type in the chats there. We'll take those up afterwards. We'll also have an opportunity to open the space to hear from each other. But I know that we are only joined by our colleague, Sophie, for a short period today. So I want to give the floor to Sophie Ebeke, who will be speaking on the role of national and local communities of practice as valuable spaces for sharing lessons learned and connecting on evaluation. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us once again in an Indeed event. We're looking forward to hearing from your work and experiences.
Thank you, Kai, and thank you also for having me today for such an interesting and valuable conversation on the role of community of practices. Maybe I can start with a brief introduction to my background and the work that I've been doing, just to give everyone a bit of an insight of where my expertise comes from. So as Kai mentioned at the beginning, I'm working for the Global Public Policy Institute, which is a think and do tank in Berlin that focuses on a variety of issue areas, one of which is monitoring and evaluation. And within this role, we are contributing at the moment to the Preval project. Just a bit of a background on Preval itself. This is a German research and transfer project that aims to conduct research, develop and redesign formats and structures to strengthen evaluation and quality assurance in extremism prevention, democracy promotion, and civic education, specifically in Germany. So for the most part, this is a larger consortium, similar to Indeed, perhaps, where we are working with a range of project partners, of which GPPI is playing one role. And the majority of our project partners are focusing on evaluation and quality assurance for extremism prevention, democracy promotion, and civic education on the German context. Where my colleagues and I are coming in is sort of expanding this perspective onto the international sphere. So we are interested in understanding what are challenges, but also good practices and innovations for evaluation and quality assurance for PCVE everywhere but Germany. And to do that, to better understand these issue areas, we recently conducted an international expert survey that focuses on evaluation stakeholders, methods, innovations, but also, as I mentioned, challenges, and one small portion focused on the role of support structures, including networks, toolkits, trainings, everything to support capacity building. And within this expert survey, one thing that really came forward was the role that networks play in strengthening evaluation expertise and bringing people together and addressing a significant lack of evaluation capacity that still persists in many different countries. Preval itself also understands itself as an open network and invites other actors that are interested to collaborate through different workshops and so-called future labs, where we discuss new ideas for bringing evaluation and evaluation practice forward. So zooming in a little bit on what we found from our expert survey, this is part of a larger study that will be hopefully published within the next 2 weeks. So if anyone is interested or has more specific questions about the whole extent of the research, because I can only focus on the role of networks today, feel free to also contact me, and I'm happy to share more details of the report as soon as it's out. So speaking on the role of networks, when we asked our experts what types of support structures they considered the most valuable for strengthening evaluation expertise, for exchanging on evaluation questions, they again and again mentioned the role of informal and formalized networks. So when we talk about informal networks, this could be connections that you have through your own personal network, just knowing someone that has conducted an evaluation before, that has specific expertise on a particular evaluation method, for instance, that you can just call up or send an email and say, hey, I'm currently developing an evaluation for my PCVE initiative. Can you help me with a question? And then there's also the role of more formalized PCVE networks, in which sometimes we see webinars being held on evaluation, or policy briefs coming out of the Radicalization and Awareness Network, for instance, that Kai mentioned previously, that focus on evaluation for PCVE initiatives. Experts particularly value networks for knowledge exchange and the ability to stimulate discussions and collective problem solving. So really this idea of networks providing a space where you can discuss common challenges, but also innovative approaches forward. Thereby, these types of exchanges encourage mutual learning, but also the generation of new knowledge. So this idea of developing ways forward to improve evaluation practice for PCVE. Personal connections within networks make it also easier to seek evaluation advice. So this is a little bit the idea that I mentioned of knowing people that have conducted an evaluation before, have specific expertise that you can get in contact with. And they also facilitate platforms for experts that have evaluation expertise to share resources, but also insights based on their own evaluation experiences. This can include, for instance, tips on how to conduct evaluations in specific PCVE settings, but also overcoming common obstacles that we know are often shared across contexts, or how to interpret evaluation results more effectively. So overall, networks, so PCVE networks, for instance, can be a great first step for a community of practice to be developed, because they facilitate these types of exchanges that are suitable for COPs. Generally speaking, I have to give this disclaimer because I'm going to move on to the role of local networks. I just want to emphasize that this is not a competitive space. Josephine just gave a really insightful presentation on the UN's efforts to develop a community of practice. And just because I'm talking about COPs in a local context doesn't mean that we shouldn't encourage the development of community of practices at regional and international level. In fact, some of our experts particularly emphasize the role of having different levels of community of practices and support networks, because not every country context has that type of support for evaluation, especially within the PCVE space. So some countries that we surveyed had almost no type of evaluation support, and experts were particularly looking to engage with stakeholders at a regional level, again, like the Radicalization Awareness Network, because they were missing this type of support in their own context. So just to say, we can have many COPs at different levels. Why do we think, however, that local networks play a role? So I'm just going to advertise a little bit about this idea to also implement community of practices at local level within local networks. And one aspect of this is that especially smaller implementers that work on very localized initiatives often have extremely limited time and budget and struggle with engaging with evaluation issues. Josephine mentioned this a little bit before, that there's a hesitancy sometimes to engage. The other issue is also visibility. So some of you might be researchers or might already participate in different types of PCVE networks and may be familiar with certain initiatives coming from the UN, coming from Hidayah, coming from RUN as mentioned, but many more localized implementers do not have the time to try to find these networks in which they can engage. So organizing something at the local level where there are maybe already existing connections can be a bit easier and lower access barriers. This can also help build local capacity because you are able to address specific evaluation challenges that are particular to the specific context that we're talking about that might not always be discussed when we're talking about COPs at an international level because it is less localized. That's not always the case. We also know that a lot of evaluation challenges are of course, shared across contexts. It's also what our survey found. But some issues or some initiatives work with such localized issues that it can be helpful to provide a safe space where these particular scenarios can be addressed on a more localized level. When thinking now a little bit about how can this be successful, so a question that follows the session is also how can we ensure that a community of practice is effective? One thing I want to bring forward is, and this was also something that Josephine mentioned, so I'm glad to see this being addressed, is that evaluation within the PCVE space is often discussed only marginally. So when we asked experts what type of PCVE networks they know at a local, regional, national level, they brought forward a plethora of initiatives that exist, but usually evaluation is only a very small aspect and is not always visible. So you might have something, again, like the Radicalization Awareness Network, sometimes hosts a webinar or brings forward guidelines on evaluation, but the network itself is not really known for evaluation expertise. And that makes it difficult for local implementers that are maybe not as aware that evaluation topics are being discussed to see these linkages between PCVE and evaluation. So what we have is a plethora of PCVE networks. We also have a plethora of evaluation-specific networks like the German or American Evaluation Society, but there then what is missing is sort of this understanding for the PCVE field. To provide a bit of a positive outlook, a positive example, sometimes these linkages do exist. An example from the Preval context is, for instance, the German Evaluation Society's working group on democracy, which brings together stakeholders working on democracy promotion, civic participation, promotion of civil society, as well as political education and extremism prevention, and gives them a discussion space to discuss evaluation for these different areas of work. The way that visibility is promoted is, for instance, through an annual spring conference, which happens in collaboration with the Preval project and just took place a few weeks ago, that brings together stakeholders from practice, but also researchers, decision makers. We had some representatives from the German ministries, but also evaluation consultancies. So it's a very diverse range of stakeholders being present, and it gives them a space to engage with each other, to connect, and also getting to know the German Evaluation Society if they're interested in joining and, yeah, sort of expanding their evaluation expertise through this network. So maybe just to finish, because I know we're also short on time, one thing I want to bring forward to the discussion is, first of all, the question if any of you have engaged with PCVE networks that had an evaluation component. So far, we haven't come across many examples, so I'd be very curious to hear if you know any from the work that you've been doing. And also taking into discussion this idea of how can we make community of practices inclusive? how can we ensure that all the stakeholders that we want to have present in these discussion spaces are actually being addressed? And this requires making a potential community of practice visible, engaging with stakeholders directly, organizing events that are inviting a wide variety, but also thinking about especially smaller implementers that may not have this visibility or may not reach out to networks that are a little bit bigger, that they have not in contact. So this idea of how can we reach everyone to strengthen evaluation experience and expertise for PCVE more comprehensively.
Sophie, thank you so much for such an interesting, engaging, and again, very rich presentation. I think this contributes wonderfully to the conversation that we're having. And one thing that I should share together with everyone joining us today, that really is the aim of this session, to have a conversation together. We're joined for the day 2 of the Indeed Policy Forum by colleagues from Indeed, by practitioners, both from across Europe and internationally, researchers, law enforcement, people from a wide range of backgrounds, and also people working in evaluation. And the idea of this session was to provide a space for all of us as colleagues in this field to hear from some experiences and to think a bit together about communities of practice as a platform, as a space, as a tool that can help us in improving the work we're doing in the field. Now, I apologize because I am not Eileen van Leuven, so I cannot do as rich a presentation as Eileen would have shared with us on their experiences, but I am going to share a bit of a presentation with you before we then open up into our plenary session. And in this presentation, I will be speaking a bit about the role of communities of practice and their value and potential to strengthen evidence-based evaluation in the PCVE and de-radicalization fields. Now, some of what I'm sharing might be very familiar to everyone, but some of it can be new also for those of us who may not have worked directly in communities of practice or have as much own experience with them. And in some ways, this could have come even as an introduction to the session, but we wanted to have the chance to hear from these experiences and now look a bit together at communities of practice and then open up to ask everyone here, what would make communities of practice relevant for you? What types of functionalities would you want communities of practice to have? How could communities of practice support you in your work? And to have a conversation together about how we can make communities of practice relevant and practical at our various levels to support our work within the PVE, CVE, and de-radicalization fields. So I'm going to start just with a quote from Etienne Wenger. And for anyone who's really working in the field of communities of practice, Etienne's work both on the communities of practice publication first and then cultivating communities of practice was really some of the early pioneering, bringing forward this idea of fostering communities of practice. And Etienne wrote, communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern, a set of problems, or a passion about a topic, and who deepen their knowledge and expertise in this area by interacting on an ongoing basis. And early in Etienne's work in publications, he brought forward these 3 key components of a community of practice. One is a domain, the actual field we work in, the set of questions, issues, challenges that we face that bring us together. The second is creating a community, bringing people together and fostering relationship, network, connection, collaboration amongst a community of practitioners working in a specific field, on a specific issue, or to bring forward specific types of solutions and innovations. And the third component, which is at the heart of communities of practice and what separates them from communities of interest, is the field of practice. It is about connecting practitioners to be able to share on their experiences, on innovations, on challenges, and helping to foster solutions and to work to improve practice together. We also have a more recent visualization from the field, which looks at coming together, communities of practice as a practice in a space, coming together on a common theme or purpose. So there's something that unites those who are working in a community of practice. Through the community of practice, working to foster and build trust amongst members. This is very relevant because, for example, we carried out surveys in several member states of the European Union, not in the Indeed, but in the earlier Takedown and Champions projects. And when looking at what were the major challenges that were faced by local practitioners working in the PVE, CVE, and de-radicalization fields, one of the answers, in fact, the number one answer given in most countries, was lack of trust. Sometimes lack of trust between different agencies and institutions in the field, and also sometimes lack of trust between institutions and organizations and local communities. Communities of practice which create a space for coming together around common purpose and issues and opportunities for regular interaction can help to strengthen and improve relationships and build trust amongst practitioners both within and across different sectors. Communities of practice build trust and build this connection and community in order to share tacit and explicit knowledge together, to share our knowledge, to share our experiences, and developing space to exchange on shared practice. The aim of this is to more robustly be able to advance what is here called collective or common intelligence, knowledge, and understanding in the field in order to improve implicitly and explicitly held knowledge within the community of practice, helping to advance this within the field. To look at it in another way on work developed from Oliver Serrat's earlier contribution. So what are communities of practice? They're communities of practice that share a domain, share the topic. They have a desire to share work-related knowledge. So it's people that are motivated, passionate, interested, professional in our fields. And we want to find solutions, learn from experiences, share knowledge on what we're working on, and have a passion for learning things that are practical for our work. Also, they emphasize that the membership should be self-selected. Now, this is very important. When you look at a lot of collaborative platforms, joint operating centers, and others, sometimes the membership in them is delegated or mandated. Someone is sent to be there. Now, if that person is highly motivated in their professional work, they find a value in it, and they have a professional ethics of responsibility, then even when they're mandated, they still engage to a high level of performance. But we've actually seen that one of the main challenges and reasons why a lot of multi-stakeholder spaces don't work is that the people have been sent to it on instruction from higher levels, but they're not necessarily motivated or don't see the value. In a community of practice, members are there because they have chosen to be there, because they feel that this is a space that can support them. And I'll speak in a moment about how that space can actually help many practitioners also to address challenges that they face in their own organizations. What do communities of practice do? There's so much they can do, but one bit is they provide a means to exchange data, information, and knowledge freely. There is no cost barrier to it. We're exchanging information and knowledge on the specific areas relevant for us in our work. They break down communication barriers. Very often, there are no formal means of communication or connection between people in different spaces, be they in different organizations, different institutions. By creating a community of practice, barriers to communication are broken down on the one hand, but also means of communication are enabled and facilitated. They're created through the existence of the community of practice. They can provide an informal, welcoming social environment. And this is one of the things that I mentioned in terms of speaking to the values that they can give to people that they may not sometimes have in their organizations. When we were facilitating collaborative spaces and communities of practice amongst practitioners working on de-radicalization at local levels, and we then surveyed them about what did they find useful, the number one feedback was the psychological significance and the emotional importance of connecting with other colleagues and practitioners of like mind, other colleagues and practitioners from other organizations or other sectors also wrestling with the same challenges, working to find solutions, and simply that sense of community, which was seen as increasing motivation as well as bringing many practical benefits, that people were learning from each other, having conversations with people that could understand the issues they were facing, and also finding solutions together. They provide a means for relationship building and networking, as mentioned, and this can improve multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder collaboration, improving shared knowledge and shared understanding in the field. And they also populate and reference their what's called knowledge network workspace. So it helps us to have a network of people working on the topics and issues that we're addressing in our domain that we can reach out to and that we gain insight from. And this idea of creating shared knowledge as well as principles and standards for practice. That doesn't mean that it has to enforce a cement code or just have one, this is how things are done, but it means that, as many of us know, working in counterterrorism, preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization, we have seen a lot of bad practices in the field, continuing often over years, even though we know it doesn't work. And we often face the challenge of how do we implement mainstream and get taken up better practices that we know are what we should be doing. For example, in the field of evaluation, so many of us know that it helps tremendously to build evaluation in from the start of designing projects and programs, but still that very often doesn't happen. That's one of the things that the Indeed tool actually provides clear guidance on and encourages. Another is that we know that, for example, doing a plan evaluation or an ex ante evaluation before a strategy, policy, or initiative is adopted can actually help us identify many of the challenges and the reasons why programs and initiatives sometimes don't work before even beginning. Amongst many practitioners, this knowledge is there, but sometimes these are tools or ideas which others may not even be familiar with or have had the opportunity to hear yet. Communities of practice help to bring forward and then distill principles and better standards of practice in fields, advancing key principles and values to guide practice as well. Here, for example, to really look at how do we put in inclusion, address gender, engage in ethical practice, and strengthen cultural competency and societal aspects in our work are things that communities of practice can discuss, exchange on, and help to bring forward as good standards within the field. In terms of how they operate, there are a number of different ways. They are often in continuous communication. This can be over shared platforms. It doesn't mean flooding your inboxes or flooding your notes, but just regular communication. One of the studies that looks at differences between communities of practice that work and those that don't work has emphasized you need to find that sweet spot, that right balance that provides regular communication so people get information, but it doesn't either flood with too much or be so infrequent that people lose their connection to it. They hold gatherings at times that are relevant for the practitioners. It could be annual. That can be very important to have an annual space where people come together. Some communities of practice work quarterly to bring together, but the point is to have scheduled gatherings online or in person that we do really bring forward the value of in person. It can be complemented also by online gatherings where the people are meeting, sharing, exchanging together. They arrange knowledge sharing events. They facilitate formal and informal interaction responding to needs. And really critically now in 2024 and beyond, looking at adaptive technologies and platforms that can be regularly accessed by members and help on knowledge management so that we can have case studies, tools, latest learnings available at our fingertips. And they can include joint publications, research, training, knowledge management, and more. I've already spoken too much, so I'm going to stop there, but we will share and send out later. This is another visual that looks at some of the key elements of what communities of practice can provide as functionality and value, how they work as antennae. By being part of a community of practice, you discover and learn about things which in silos we may not, so it can help for both practitioners and organizations. They really can play a significant role in consolidating and integrating knowledge, enabling knowledge transfer and preservation so that lessons and insights don't just get lost by turnover in organizations. They support the development of the value proposition. To make this really clear what's meant by this, bringing forward, for example, in the field, the value and importance of evidence-based evaluation and evidence-based policy and practice. When we have carried out interviews, when we've organized smart hubs, when we've organized forums and spoken and engaged with so many practitioners and researchers and experts across Europe and internationally, people continuously say that they want better evidence, that they understand the importance of evaluation, that we need the tools for it, but still as a field, there isn't that clear policy support, funding support, organizational support, so that it's part of our standard practice and to advance good quality practice in how we do it. And communities of practice have really been cited by those who have experience within them as helping to assist innovation in bringing forward solutions and better practices. Also, just to connect with what was said by Josephine earlier, they can foster joint evaluations within and across sectors and improve the practice of joint learning, joint training, and joint knowledge development, both through events, through putting in place systems and processes within a field. Some of the things that are very important, and we don't have time to go into this, but for those who want to look at it further, you need to make sure there are the right conditions which are enabling for a community of practice to function, the right structures in terms of spaces, times, frequency of meeting. There are COPs that have worked amazingly, and there are very many that have failed. There's a lot of experience and lessons on this. So if you're looking at developing one, or if you're facing challenges in them, it's worth looking into that evidence base so that we do it right. The processes of how they work are vital, and also everyone having a shared understanding of those processes and processes being tailored to meet the real needs of the practitioners and agencies involved. And then the content, that the content of what they address is fit for the field. Just to finalize, to share with you some short-term value for members. They can provide meaningful and supportive community, help to understand we're not alone, address shared interest issues and challenges, find solutions to challenges, foster practical cooperation, and they have been cited for increasing people's motivation and encouragement for their work. For organizations, they can help for problem solving, time saving, knowledge sharing, foster synergies across sectors and agencies, improve practices. They've been proven to increase staff motivation and help agencies have more effective use of resources. For long-term value, they support professional and personal development, enhance professional networks, support improved performance and advocacy within our organizations, professional identity, and greater visibility. For organizations, they can enhance strategic capabilities, improve organizations' ability to keep up to date, support innovation, retain talents, bring in new strategies and approaches that work, and improve uptake of tools and front-of-field practices and knowledge. And just to share for the last bit, communities of practice can be both formal and informal. Many of us develop communities of practice with colleague practitioners in the field. They can be created within organizations and institutions to bring people together dealing with similar issues, but also within systems, for example, law enforcement or education. They can also be sectoral and multi-sectoral. And as we've heard from both Josephine and Sophie's presentations, they can be created at organizational levels, at local, national, and international and global levels. My apologies for speaking perhaps a bit too long, but I hope that that presentation helps to bring in a bit more for us on what are communities of practice and how they can be relevant and useful for our field. Now, if we can open up, we're going to move to the next session of today's event, which is a space for discussion and engaging together and hearing from you about your thoughts or experiences on communities of practice. Now, Sophie has had to leave. She only had 1 hour to be available with us today, but we still have Josephine and myself who are here. And I'd like to invite, if you have questions that you'd like to ask to Josephine from her presentation, or questions you'd like to ask of myself, you can share those with us in the chat, or put up your hand and using the raise hand function on Zoom, and we can engage together with those discussions. I'm also going to ask my colleague Norina, we have a short survey that we'd like to share with everyone, asking you for what functionalities would be most useful for you in a community of practice for evidence-based evaluation. So that should be up as a poll or a quiz on your screen at the moment. And it's looking at what for you would be the most important functions of a community of practice for evidence-based evaluation in the PCV and de-radicalization fields. And there are a number of options. Some of them seem similar, but they look at it from different angles. So it can be connecting with other practitioners, being part of a community, knowledge exchange, learning from case studies, discovering new and effective methods and approaches, training or capacity building opportunities, improving recognition of the importance of evaluation, identify improvement opportunities in the field, access to publications and resources, or supporting innovations and improvements in methods and approaches. And if you can scroll down as well on the list, and you'll see there are a few more options: consolidating existing knowledge and tools, developing common tools and knowledge management platforms, overcoming and weeding out bad practices in the field, improving ability to influence policy and policymakers, and learning from other countries and contexts. So if you can, we'd like to invite you, you can put in one answer, or you can click on as many as you'd like and submit it. And then afterwards, we're going to share the results of those communities, of that survey on communities of practice with you. I don't know if we're able to harvest it within the presentation itself today, but either we will, or we'll be able to share it in the post-event note that goes out. So for now, actually, Josephine, as we wait for some questions to come in, can I ask you, you have such deep experience yourself as a practitioner working in evaluation, both at national and international levels. You've been developing this pioneering work within the UN. And I'd just like to ask you as a practitioner for your thoughts about communities of practice and how they can be important, or how you may have benefited as a practitioner yourself from opportunities for engaging with others that are working in the evaluation field.
Thank you very much, Kai. So I think for me, as evaluators, sometimes we work in spaces where we're not familiar. I was coming from an evaluation field where there was substantive things that we could measure. For instance, infrastructure development. It's easy to evaluate, the stages where it is at. Education, you've got really these indicators that are very easy, to work with. But I think when you get to the UN or the work that we do, which is normative work, it's more about policy. And so the results are not very readily available. You have to really search and find tools that should be able to, sort of generate the information that you need to know if there's a progress that is going on. So in that instance, I think I found it very useful to connect with colleagues who were already well-versed in evaluating normative work. I belong to the United Nations Evaluation Group, UNEG, which is a very big working, actually it's a COP for UN entities. And of course, there are some observers there, and there are a lot of processes there that help out in how, methodologies, different kinds of tools to help in measuring these normative work. So I think that has been my experience. It's been very helpful, to engage in these different working groups under UNEG and see the nuance of evaluation work related to the normative work.
Thank you so much for that, Josephine. We have a question from Vasileos. Vasileos, please, if you can unmute your microphone, we look forward to your question or comment.
Hello, everybody. Many thanks, Josephine, for your presentation and all the speakers. You mentioned in your presentation that sometimes there is a kind of challenge working with CT experts, and evaluation. And as I'm a police officer, having, this CT background, I would like to ask you, based on your experience, what is the main reason that we face this challenge with CT practitioners concerning the evaluation?
Thank you, Vasilios. I hope I pronounced your name very well.
Perfect.
Yes. So I think one thing from our experience is that we as evaluators, first of all, don't explain very well the value of evaluation and the information that it should bring to better to ensure that these subject matter experts in CT understand the benefits, of evaluative evidence. And so most of the challenge has been that they really didn't understand the value. They would say, why do I need to do an evaluation? I know this program is working very well, or I've been doing this for a long time. I don't need anybody else to tell me how it's going, And so this is the space where we try to engage and say, yes, it's been working very well, but I'm sure you would want substantive evidence, first of all, from the beneficiaries of your services, for instance, and other stakeholders, of how they receive your service, and having this primary information coming from the first-hand beneficiaries of the deliverables is something that we always try to convince the CT practitioners, because as they are not coming from evaluation background, they actually understandably don't understand the value of having this evidence to sort of boost the work that you do. You see what is working, what is not working, but also as a resource mobilization tool, for instance. Our funders always want to see, where their money is going and what impact it's making. And evaluation is one of the tools where we can be able to demonstrate that. I hope I answered your question.
Thanks so much, Josephine. And Vasilios, if I could also share some reflections on that. So challenges in engaging with counterterrorism or other practitioners when looking at evaluation. And Josephine, you were speaking about understanding the benefits of evaluation. Some of the feedback that we have received from practitioners both across Europe and internationally is it's not only that they need to understand the benefits of evaluation, but they need to actually experience the benefits of evaluation. And there, one of our major challenges is how evaluation is often done today. I think we are hopefully soon going to be approaching an end to a first multi-decades generations of sometimes not the best practices of evaluation, and begin moving towards evaluations which are really much more fit, competent, and fit for professional use and purpose. We've sometimes discussed that we need to bring forward a culture of evaluation within the field and amongst practitioners. But we had a brilliant colleague from Greece at the one of the Indeed trainings in Madrid who said, it's not that we need to bring forward a culture of evaluation. There is already a culture of evaluation, but it's the current culture that we have, which is part of the challenge. And that's where practitioners often experience that evaluation is imposed on them from above, from a ministry, from a government, from a donor. And sometimes the focus is just on understanding, did something happen? How much money was spent? And really a tick box approach. In this model, evaluators are often brought in from academic institutions or consultancies who may have no domain experience or knowledge, may take a very almost administrative, bureaucratic approach to the evaluation, more like an audit. And the process harvests results which are then shared upwards to decision makers, policy makers, donors. The people who take part in it as practitioners often experience it as a time burden. They're answering the questions, but they don't see the results back to them. Maybe they give input, suggestions, recommendations. They don't hear or see, are those ever taken up or used? They see no functional utility or value to having taken part in it. And we've heard from many, experienced almost as an exploitative or extractive process. That is part of the standard model and approach of most evaluation today, but it's what we would call toxic evaluation. In the better parts of the field, you have more competent models and approaches that are participatory, collaborative, where we really identify that you need to engage with communities and with stakeholders to understand what do they need to learn as well. The goals and priorities sometimes of governments and donors to be able to see, were things done, was money used well, those are very valid and very legitimate, but sometimes practitioners may really want to understand what's working, how's it working, in what way. And we need to deal with this critical aspect of the fear that can exist around evaluations. For example, if it's seen that something wasn't done well, or if we faced a challenge, does that mean we won't get further funding? So these are some of the issues. What's interesting also is there are facilitative, developmental, participatory approaches to evaluation, which more and more we're looking at models to build into agencies. So we recently had the opportunity to do a video interview with Peter, I'm sorry, I should remember his last name, a brilliant colleague. He works with the Rupen Police. He's a colleague in Indeed. And what they were saying is, when they have a very expensive process of an evaluator coming in from the outside, carrying out an evaluation, and then leaving, sometimes it can be useful, but usually it's felt as a wasted opportunity, a wasted experience, and lost potential. What they're discussing is, how can we build evaluation tools into our regular work? How can we have, for example, an evaluation unit embedded within police that can help them on learning from all of their experiences? So I apologize again, I think I probably spoke too much, but what I would say is there's very real reasons why many practitioners are not too motivated. Part of it comes from still the field is new, many haven't been exposed to it, but a lot of it comes from the bad practice of how contemporary conventional evaluation is done. What is exciting is in the recent decades, there's been such pioneering and innovation of better practices that really fit for the field. And I think some of that is also brought forward a bit in the work from Indeed as well. We have another question from Lena Hartman. Lena, please. If you turn on your screen and your microphone.
Hello, I'm very sorry, my video camera seems not to be working, but I'm hoping you can hear me clear, so I hope this works well. My name is Lena Hartman. I'm also a research associate with the Violence Prevention Network and work with Preval, the project Sophie has already presented. And actually, I just wanted to add to the discussion. I don't have a further question. Because what we experience, and that's what I wanted to emphasize as well, is the very important point of developing evaluation concepts together, because that's something which was said so many times because of potential fears of different kinds of consequences. And also what we experience and what we find in our data is that there's a very heterogeneous field of practitioners. So some are very experienced and some have a really high meaning and feel that evaluation is very, very important, and others are just not that connected yet. And therefore, what is common within all of these is that there needs to be time and also money to actually work with evaluation. So what we have experienced is, basically that they need financial time and resources, which is why it is so important to support from the beginning, which means from the beginning from a project, but maybe also, for example, when writing an application, to see what kind of money is actually needed, how much time is needed to be a partner when it comes to evaluation with evaluation experts. So maybe just these 2 points in addition.
Lena, thank you so much for sharing that experience. And that's really what we want in this space as well. And we would invite also if other colleagues who are joining here today would like to input your experiences as well, it would be wonderful to hear from them. Lena, thank you so much for those really, really important points as well. We have a number of questions that have been raised in chat, and I'd like to read one out, Josephine, if we could address it here. One is from Laura Pisterini, Teixeira Nunes. Laura, apologies if I did not pronounce as well as I should. She says, thank you very much for the insightful presentations. I was wondering if both Josephine and Kai could extend a bit on strategies you found useful in making communities of practice inclusive and representative of the diversity of practitioners on the ground, and avoiding gatekeeping heavily academic spaces that sometimes are not fully accessible to all. Thank you in advance. And thank you, Laura, for your question. Josephine, could you start us off on your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that's a very, very valid observation. You know, communities, and I think what you've stated there is actually a recipe of failure of most of CLPs. You know, you want to put them in this jacket. But for us, it begins with a process. For instance, what do we want to develop? And in what space is this useful? So once you realize that you have something that you want to co-create, then you go out and look for partnerships, you know, which individuals are best placed to provide this relevant information. This is important because it will also generate their interest. So you're not like forcing things on them, but you're actually appealing to their interest to engage based on this product that is important to them. So that is one major point. And of course, the second point is to be as flexible as possible, you know, agile, you know, you bring in all these different perspectives. The evaluators, we always try to fall into this space to think if we know everything or we want to just cooperate with like-minded evaluators. But we gain a lot when we invite people from different spectrums in their careers, backgrounds, so that they bring in their perspective in this spectrum. And we've been able to do that. So in our work, we've invited, you know, member states. And when I say member states, they will be like experts that are in different fields, you know, policymakers. We've brought in counterterrorism experts, and counterterrorism is a broad field as well. You look about those that are more versed with prevention, and those that counter this financing for terrorism. You bring in all these people, and then you find that at the end of the day, they bring in the different nuances to this product, and it becomes even more enriched. So we've been able to work across, you know, different expertise to come up with different products. I think I'll end here. Over to you, Kai. I'm sure you want to add something.
Thank you so much, Josephine. So I actually just shared in the chat space an article which I would really invite everyone to engage with if you have the opportunity. We'll send it out in the note after this event as well. It's called Rethinking Rigor to Embrace Complexity in Peacebuilding Evaluation. And it's from a collective, an informal community of practice, which has come together of evaluator practitioners and academics from around the world who have developed what they call the inclusive rigor framework. And it's looking at how can we practice and implement inclusiveness in ways that support and strengthen the rigor of evaluations. And this is very important because one of the critiques that was sometimes brought from part of the field of evaluation through the 90s and 2000s was that when we spoke about more effective and authentic participatory processes and really engaging with listening to communities or to sometimes excluded or vulnerable actors, it was sometimes scoffed at and seen as not scientific enough, not rigorous enough in the methodology, while continuing to use methods and tools which often fostered exclusion and perpetuated certain voices not being heard. So they deal with this through this working on the inclusive rigor framework, very good approach, and also part of the Shift the Power movement. And what I would reflect and share, completely supporting Josephine, your comments, I really love the model of evidence-based evaluation, which has been put forward by Stefan Klossen in the Indeed project, where it looks at, there's one sphere which is best existing knowledge and evaluations or evidence in the field. So vetted, tested, looking at what's the knowledge we have within our agencies more broadly in the field. And that itself is important because very often we just keep doing what we do. We don't look at other knowledge or evidence that exists out there. But the other two spheres, one of them is practitioners' professional judgment and expertise, and recognizing the need to really engage with practitioners whose voices sometimes are not heard in setting policy, for example. And we need to look at what methods can we use to engage with practitioners to bring out our experiences in ways that we can really test that and bring forward the valid evidence. Because sometimes I might have my subjectivity or my bias or my what I'm used to, but I also have experience, and you have to find a way to engage with both of that to bring out experience that can inform evidence. But the third is the crucial space of stakeholders and communities. And engaging with communities, cultures, contexts, values, preferences, and needs. And this, I think, is going to bring forward for those working in evaluation the emphasis on really engaging with and understanding the broader breadth of stakeholders and communities whose voices are often not listened to or not heard in more rigorous evaluation. There's been work done by our colleagues working on JELSA in the project, where they've also developed guidelines looking at how to engage with vulnerable communities and those who are excluded. Norbert Leonhardt and Hannah Reiter, I believe, looking at both when designing initiatives and when designing evaluations. And I think there's some very good work there. Josephine, there are more questions. I don't see any hands up at the moment. We do need a bit of space in the second day of the policy forum today to speak to the upcoming events. But I'd like to ask you also, part of our orientation in this is to look at engaging with policy and policymakers. And we had a number joining us yesterday. We have a number with us today as well. Yesterday, we were looking at the role of policy and policymakers to some extent and speaking about the importance of evidence-based evaluation. I know at the UN, you're bringing forward such vital work, bringing member states together, bringing forward important tools. If I could ask you, just from your experience, what do we need to see from policymakers? What's the role? What's the importance of policymakers in this conversation that we're having about bringing forward better systems, better tools, and bringing forward evaluation more in the field? And then that specific discussion we've been having today around communities of practice. How can policymakers support? What would it be good to see to be understood and to see coming from policymakers in this field?
Thank you, Kai. So from our experience, I think working with policymakers is, it's, first of all, they are, traditionally speaking, they are very busy people. So you need to be very focused when you are engaging them. And so if you go with, all these lengthy discussions of what is important, what is not important about evaluations, definitely there won't be audience for that. So I think the most important thing is to be targeted. What exactly do we need policymakers to help us with? And for us, like for what we did with the meta synthesis, we didn't go into requesting, first of all, for the seed funding because we needed to do an evaluation. We went in with the message to say, there's a lot that has been done with UN entities in, generating evidence of what they've done. Are you able to know exactly from a global picture of what has been done, And then they got interested. So, actually it would be important to see what has been done globally, And so that message was simple enough for them to engage and also, drive the process that we had. So for us, I think we believe that packaging the information for policymakers to be able to help them make the decisions is very important, because then they'll be able to understand, using less jargon of evaluation language, very policy related language, that appeals to their level. Then that is very beneficial, and we found this to work in most instances. I mean, there are a lot of other ways that we've done it, but unless you want me to continue, I can end here. Yeah, you're on mute.
I was just saying, I think that was great and really appreciate it. And we've had so many comments in the chat as well from so many of our colleagues and participants joining here today saying thank you for the wonderful presentations. And I really especially want to thank you, Josephine, for that, and to thank Sophie. I will be sending her a message after. We hope that this part of day 2 has been a space to both hear about some of the really important work that's being done in the field. We've heard in such detail from the presentation from Josephine, from the UN's experience and engagement here. Also, as Sophie mentioned, and Lena, thank you for sharing on this as well, Preval, a very innovative step within Europe at a national level, trying to bring together researchers, evaluators, practitioners. We've had the tremendous work done in RAN over the last years, the Radicalization Awareness Network. We're now at the threshold of creating this new step, at least within the European space, of the EU Knowledge Hub. This will be an opportunity and a moment for all of us as researchers, practitioners, evaluators, policymakers, and colleagues in the field to also be giving shape to how that knowledge hub will work through the coming years. And it's part of our hope that communities of practice will actually really be one of the instruments that are taken forward. Communities of practice being encouraged at local levels. We need much more of this. We have some very good examples in Europe in the last 20 years and elsewhere, where there's an architecture put in place to bring together multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder groups at local levels, but still across so much of the continent, we don't have those local spaces for coming together to improve knowledge sharing, collaborative practice, and improving our evidence base. At national levels, where some countries have regular national conferences, national coming together of practitioners, researchers, and academics, but in most parts of the European Union, we don't have any national regular fora that bring together policymakers, academics, and practitioners. And also then at the international level, both across the EU and through the UN globally. And while the Indeed project is one focusing in the European space, we also hope and support our colleagues and practitioners and agencies and organizations around the world in advancing communities of practice and evidence-based evaluation and practice there. Now, in our last moments today, we're using this opportunity coming together to also be able to share with you about some of the exciting upcoming events that are happening. One is immediately now, just in a few weeks in Riga, we will actually be having a policy recommendations workshop, bringing together policymakers from local and national levels and from institutions in the EU, harvesting lessons and experiences from the 3 years of the Indeed project, which has included lots of surveys, lots of interviews, meetings of smart hubs at national levels across the EU. We'll be harvesting and bringing from those, creating a space for discussion with policymakers about how to support, improve, and advance evidence-based evaluation and evidence-based policy and practice. But the main event, which this last part of today's session is dedicated to, is the Indeed final event and second international forum on From Evidence to Practice towards improved policy and practice. While we have had a lot of in-person events in Indeed, we have also had many, many dozens of online meetings, online webinars. We had the first international Indeed Policy and Practitioners Forum, which Josephine, Sophie, so many of you here with us and so many colleagues took part in online in November of 2023. And that's why we are really excited about the Indeed final event and second international forum, because it will be in person. It's going to take place in Warsaw, Poland. Poland, of course, where the Polish Platform for Homeland Security, the lead, the coordinator, the champion that really brought forward the Indeed project together with so many wonderful partners, Polish Platform for Homeland Security will be hosting this event at a wonderful location in Warsaw, which they have found. Now, what is it? It is the final event of the Indeed project, which is quite sad for many of us because it really has been an amazing project to engage in. It's the final event and the second International Policy and Practitioners Forum. And these are being organized as an integrated dynamic event where we're just collecting together the resources from both of them to be able to do more of an event over 3 days from September 11th to 13th to really try and bring together as many practitioners, policymakers, experts, academics that are really working in this field of evidence-based evaluation and evidence-based policy and practice. And that includes working at local levels, national levels, the European Commission, the United Nations, and other international and national policy and decision makers to advance evidence-based practice together. Now, who, as you're saying, it's really towards practitioners. We'll have colleagues coming from law enforcement agencies, NGOs, civil society organizations, social workers, educators, all people working within the preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization fields, and also the crime prevention fields. We'll have policy and decision makers and state representatives, academics, experts, and evaluators from across the European Union and internationally, and also international agencies and organizations, including the European Commission, the United Nations, the OSCE, and others. How we will be doing it: dynamic front of field presentations. I really love on day one, we'll be starting in the afternoon. We're actually starting with a networking and connecting event. So rather than going directly into conferences, plenary sessions, discussions, and presentations, we're simply going to start with a space for people to be coming together and trying to create a more innovative space. And this is going to be followed by some really exciting and key presentations on key issues that we're engaging with in the field. It'll be highly participatory and engaging. On day two, that is the session dedicated to the forum, where we're going to have 2 to 3 sessions happening throughout all moments of the day, as well as a design forum, bringing all of us together to really look at how to advance the field and looking at frontiers and next steps in the field. We'll have topics on evidence-based evaluation, learning from cases and projects. Also, we'll have a dedicated session of communities of practice. It's really going to be focusing as well on advancing practical policy recommendations, and will be a space that we're now discussing, and we're hoping there'll be an opportunity bringing together the new EU Knowledge Hub in person, so that we can be exploring and working together on next steps in the field. So this is a space for the rest of the time now. If you have questions or information you would like about the Indeed final event and the second international forum, I should share with you that for the first forum, we had more than 40 participating agencies and organizations, from United Nations agencies to the European Commission, Prival, the International Center for Counterterrorism, and so many universities, think tanks, local and national police agencies, and partners from across Europe and internationally. The way the forum is done is we invite practitioners, policymakers, academics, and experts to bring forward your proposals for topics and sessions. We often organize forum sessions where we're inviting a number of agencies together to present on their latest work in the field. In the first forum, we also had sharing from some of the major steps and pioneering initiatives, from the Compendium of Good Practices, which the UN helped to bring together, to the Prival project in Germany, to one of the first ever area-based evaluations with the City of London, Mayor of London's initiative, where they evaluated more than 20 different projects, initiatives, and strategies working on addressing violent extremism and radicalization in London. It's a hands-on event. It'll bring together about 130 policymakers, practitioners, and experts in the field, and it's a space really to be inspired, to share, to connect, and essentially to come together as a community of practice. So I'd like to just open in case there are questions with regards to the final event. Again, we would invite, please do raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, or put it in the chat. I'm going to address some of the questions that are in the chat right now. We are trying to see if it can be online as well. Thank you, Konstantinos Pantazis, for that question. It is first and foremost meant as an in-person event, but we're going to look at either live streaming or recording sessions and sharing them after. Is it covered? Unfortunately, we don't really have resources. I hate when giving this answer. It's always best to be able to give the answer when it's covered. But as we were discussing with colleagues from the UN, from Prival, from ICCT before, There is a challenge today. While funding of military budgets is going up dramatically around the world, funding of solution-based approaches and funding of evidence-based approaches and evaluation, we still need to do more to secure that. So we don't have additional resources to bring people in, but many agencies and organizations are sending, and from within the European Union, from national partners of Indeed, I believe in the project there's some budget to support participation that will mainly go towards practitioners, Smart Hub members, and policymakers from within each of those countries. So I think those are the questions so far. Are there any other questions that people have at the moment for the Indeed final event and second international forum? All right. We will be sharing more information on it. Oh, please, I saw a hand come up there, or someone was speaking. Okay. Norina, if I could ask you first, thank you so much to everyone who took part in the survey that we launched earlier. It was great to see how much response there was to that. And Norina is now sharing with us. And Norina, I'm not sure if Zoom will do it automatically or if we need to take screenshots, but it would be great if we can keep those results and share them out to everyone who's taking part today after this event. Here you can see what are some of the responses that were given or the responses we received. Discovering new effective methods and approaches was the one most selected for what you'd like to get from a community of practice. Knowledge exchange, connecting with other practitioners, learning from case studies, training and capacity building, and learning from other countries and contexts were all amongst the most selected, together with identifying improvement opportunities in the field. Communities of practice to work and to work best have to be practical and have to be opportunities to address the needs that we have as practitioners in the field. And I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone for sharing your input and responses on that. Again, the issue of agency is key. There's very few spaces where we actually have communities of practice in this field today. That doesn't mean that we need to sit back and wait for it to be created, but we can try to see what opportunities do we have formally and informally to advance them. And again, I'd like to cite the example taken by ICCT, the International Center for Counterterrorism, where they've created and taken the step to create the Monitoring and Evaluation Center of Excellence, M&E Center of Excellence. It has a network of practitioners, invited experts that they've brought together, and it will also provide on-call support when people want guidance on how to develop your evaluation practices and approaches in your projects. You can call them and get support for it. But ICCT also makes the choice to dedicate 5% of all of their project funding and overheads to supporting evaluation themselves in their own organization. So this is just one example, and there are many wonderful ones around the world today, but how we as individual practitioners or in our organizations can take steps, and also at local and national levels, to help advance evidence-based evaluation, policy, and practice in the field, and help to create communities of practice. I'd like to really say thank you very much to everyone who has joined us. I also see that there are many colleagues which have really done pioneering work in the Indeed project throughout the last 3 years, and just a tremendous appreciation and thanks to the work of all who have contributed. Also our partners in Smart Hubs and everyone who has been part of this initiative throughout. We'd like to thank you, those of you who've joined for day 2, those of you who've joined throughout the project, throughout the Indeed Policy Forum, for being with us on both days. We hope that this event has been a positive one and helped to provide inspiration and support for you. I'd like to again say thank you, Josephine, for joining us, and to all of your colleagues at the United Nations. Wonderful to have you with us today. And we hope that we will continue together to advance our practice and our work in the field. Thank you very much.